Hey, dear participants, we welcome you to our online event on EU disability policy and the right to independent living and being included in the community. Uh, my name is Florian Sanden and I'm policy coordinator at ENIL. First of all, I hand you over to our co-chair Nadia Haddad, who will give the welcome and introduction.
Yeah, welcome to all of you on my behalf also. So it will be a very exciting seminar. We hope that you will have a lot of questions, have been inspired, and don't hesitate to write all your questions directly in the chat or in the question and answer session. Don't hesitate to ask the floor and by the means that you can express yourself. So with this seminar, we would like to introduce you to independent living and how it is addressed in the actual EU disability policies and in others. So we will especially talk about deinstitutionalization. Rita will do that. We'll have the freedom of movement explained by Camille. I will go through the global action. And then we have also employment and access to housing that Florian and Ines will both highlight and see how we can really make it also independent living minded. And then also you can see we will have some recommendation, each of us, and there will be some testimonies by some of us about how they face barriers and how they overrun barriers or try to lobby to overrun those barriers for all other people. So without further ado, the first one is going, I will hand back over to Florian and you will be introduced to what it means independent living and then we go through all different areas. So Florian, I
Yes,
hand back over to you.
thank you, Nadia, and it's my pleasure to hand over to our first speaker, Antonella Candiago. Introduction to Independent Living.
Thank you. You can go with the next slide, please. So I would like to start the presentation with a definition of independent living by pioneer of independent living, Adolf Ratzka, who said independent living is having the same range of options and same degree of self-determination that people without a disability take for granted. Next slide, please. Before diving into the concept of independent living, I would like to quickly explain why the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the General Comments are so important. The convention, or CRPD, is a legally binding international treaty promoting and protecting the human rights of disabled people. And the CRPD committee is the body of independent experts which monitors the implementation of the convention by the state parties. This committee adopts the general comments that are fundamental in implementing the articles, as they provide authoritative guidance to the states parties and therefore should be used by them to interpret their obligation under the CRPD. Next slide, please. So why is the CRPD so important? As I said, it's legally binding, but it also marks a paradigm shift. So from the medical, we switched to the social and human rights model of disability. And even if the convention doesn't explicitly define disability, in the preamble of the convention, we find a kind of definition, and we see disability as an evolving concept. Resulting from the interaction between persons with impairments and attitudinal and environmental barriers. Next slide, please. So disability results from an interaction between a non-inclusive society and individuals. Next slide. When we talk about independent living, we don't always refer to the general idea. We also refer to a right, and this right is established in Article 19 of the CRPD. So the state parties recognize the equal right of all persons with disabilities to live in the community. And states must take appropriate measures to facilitate inclusion and participation of disabled people, ensuring they can choose their place of residence and where and with whom they want to live. So they don't have to be obliged to live in a particular living arrangement, such as institutions. Disabled people have access to arrange community support services, including personal assistance, and this should prevent isolation or segregation from the community, and ensuring that community services and facilities are available on an equal basis to persons with disabilities and are responsive to their needs. Next slide. Okay, so as I said, general comment play a crucial role in implementing the rights. And General 5 set out the state's parties' obligation under Article 19. This comment includes the definition of independent living, institutional care, and personal assistance. According to General Comment 5, independent living or living independently means that individuals with disabilities are provided with all necessary means to exercise choice and control over their life and make all decisions concerning their lives. So it's about personal autonomy and self-determination as preconditions for independent living. And in the first slide, we saw independent living is about having the same range of options and the same degree of self-determination that non-disabled people have. But if individuals are not provided with these necessary means, this is not possible. Next slide, please. When we talk about independent living, we also refer to the independent living pillars that can be defined as key supports and accommodations needed to make independent living possible. The most popular list of pillars has been created by British independent living organizations in the 1990s and includes the following 12 pillars that my colleagues will explain better later. So we have accessibility of the environment, transport, technical aids, accessible and affordable housing, personal assistance defined as individual support controlled by disabled people, education, income, employment, information, advocacy, peer support, and healthcare. Next slide, please. So why the independent living pillars are crucial? For three main reasons. First, the independent living pillars create a shared understanding about independent living, which makes advocacy initiatives focused and coherent. Second, the pillars help contextualize single issues campaigning and help to make a more holistic and comprehensive approach. For example, as a disabled person, I don't only need to have an accessible environment, but I also need to advocate for personal assistance or for technical aid at the same time. And finally, they are a powerful watchdog tool, as they help monitoring disability policies, they help to identify gaps, to suggest actions, and they can also be used as indicators of independent living state in a specific country. The history of the independent living movement suggests that the independent living pillars have always been in a state of development. So it's really important to keep these pillars in line with the current state of independent living advocacy and the current state of the country and the world. And for this, we should consider three dimensions or perspective. First, the intersectional perspective, as there's a growing diversity within the independent living movement and increasing awareness of the intersecting harms and of the restrictions on disabled people's self-determination in a normative, gender, racialized, and ageist world. Second, the independent living and emergency. So ensuring independent living even in emergency situations such as armed conflict, natural disasters, pandemics, and in the subsequent reconstruction efforts. And we should consider also the globalization of independent living. So after the spread of independent living ideas across the world, particularly in the global south, there's a need to decolonize the concept of independent living and engage with local knowledges and practices regarding the concept of self-determination. And I would like to conclude the presentation with Inil's proposal for additional independent living pillars. We have access to supported decision-making. This suggestion is related to the intersectional perspective, as the denial of legal capacity on the basis of impairment is rooted in neuronormativity and is often racialized, gender, and ageist. For example, a disabled adult from an ethnic minority or neurodivergent group is more likely to be deprived of the legal capacity. Second, knowledge about independent living history. Both the global spread of independent living and the generational changes inside the independent living movement and leadership make it necessary to promote the knowledge of independent living history, but also to remain open to new developments and local knowledges. We propose to include also support for sexual and reproductive rights, as, for example, disabled women and girls, but also people with intellectual impairments and neurodiverse people are disproportionately affected by denial of reproductive rights and lack of appropriate supports in this area. Access to internet and digital technology, which is related to the globalization of independent living, as in many people in many remote areas and in the global south are denied access to the digital world. And these represent a big barrier in participation and in the realization of independent living. Access to legal aid. This suggestion is also related to the globalization of independent living. The widespread incorporation of the CRPD in national legislation make it important to have access to legal redress. And finally, support for transitions to adulthood, higher education, employment, and from parental home and from institutional care. And it's important to say that support for transitions has always been part of the independent living support, but it has never been included as an independent living pillar. So we would like to highlight the importance of this, as successful transitions are crucial for the realization of independent living. Thank you very much, and I give the floor back to Florian.
You are muted.
Need to unmute yourself, Rita.
Yes. It's okay, just I'm muted now, but are you gonna do an introduction? Or should I just go ahead?
What do you mean?
As you want, I can just go ahead.
Yes, I already introduced you.
We could not hear you actually.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm so sorry. I had muted myself as well. Okay, I said thank you, Antonella, for your presentation, and I immediately hand over to Rita with the presentation on deinstitutionalization.
Thank you. Yes, so I will start this part by explaining first what is the institutionalization and the main concepts and documents around it, and then I will move into the institutionalization in EU disability policy, and particularly regarding European Union funding. So first, we define institutionalization as the political and social process that provides the shift from institutional care and other isolating and segregating settings into independent living. So from one side, we're removing people from institutions, but it's key to understand that it's essential to develop community-based supports and services, accessible housing, and personal support. These two things go hand in hand in the institutionalization process, as these services and support allows for people to live independently and be included in the community. Can you go into the next slide, Florian? So I took this image from our Mythbuster on independent living because I think it is important to illustrate some concepts around institutionalization. So the myth that some people believe is that living independently is not for everyone, and we will always need institutions. There is here underneath an image of a person in a wheelchair that has three choices they can take. Choice A takes to moderately disabled. Choice B is for very disabled, and choice C is for severely disabled. What this image illustrates is that to be able to live in the community, there needs to be choices that are community-based and that support the right to independent living. If the only choices that are available are institutions, there is no real choice. There needs to be options and alternatives. And the other aspect to me is that independent living is for everyone, not for only some disabilities, not for only certain people, it's for everyone. And actually, we need to prioritize those that are more at risk of being institutionalized. Can you pass to the next slide? To define then the institutionalization, we also need to look at what is an institution. The CRPD committee considers that institutionalization is any detention based on disability, typically occurring in institutions. But institutions have some defining elements, and these are the list here, which I will read. Obligatory sharing of assistance with others and no or limited influence as to who provides the assistance, isolation and segregation from independent life in the community, lack of control over day-to-day decisions, lack of choice for the individuals concerned over with whom they live, rigidity of routine irrespective of personal will and preferences, identical activities in the same place for a group of individuals under a certain authority, a paternalistic approach in service provision, supervision of living arrangements, and a disproportionate number of persons with disabilities in the same environment. It's not necessary that all of these are present, but this can indicate institutional culture and segregation. Can you move into the next slide, please? So this another image from our Mythbuster. The myth is that independent living can be achieved by building group homes and daycare centers for disabled people. And in the image, there is a drawing of a bus of people getting out, and some of them are going into the Sunshine Care Hostel, and others are going into the Sunshine Care Day Center. So this is not the institutionalization process to put people in group homes and daycare centers, because as we saw, the number of people in a place does not define what an institution is. Institutions can be large or can be small. Therefore, putting people in smaller places or in daycare centers is not the institutionalization process. Can you go into the next slide? I want to mention the UN guidelines on institutionalization, including in emergencies. This is a very important document to understand institutionalization and to guide the action to be taken by member states. It's a non-binding document from the CRPD committee, and what it does is it clarifies the implementation on the convention, and it guides the action of member states to successfully implement the institutionalization. Some key aspects that I want to highlight from the guidelines, even though I think everybody should read them, are first, that the processes of the institutionalization must be led by persons with disabilities, including those affected by institutionalization. The processes cannot be led by those involved in managing or that are perpetuating institutions. I think that's a very key concept of this leadership of disabled people and DPOs and survivors. Then the key aspects to end institutionalizations and the key obligations of member states are first to stop investing in institutions. So therefore, money needs to be transferred from institutional care into services in the community and support. The second is that there needs to be accessible, safe and accessible housing, but there will be a presentation on this later, so I will not say much more. The third is to create an enabling environment. This is by adapting the existing laws so they comply with the CRPD. For instance, by allowing, ending guardianship systems, by adding a provision of discrimination based on disability. And the last is to adopt an institutionalization plan, which must be with a clear time frame, with objectives, and very importantly, money needs to be allocated. It is not effective if there is a plan, but no money is put into this plan. And the last thing that I want to say is that, as we mentioned before, key on institutionalization is building support systems, building community-based services, but also ensuring that mainstream services are accessible to everyone. Can you go to the next slide, Florian? Now I will say a bit about institutionalization in EU funds and how can EU funds support the institutionalization process in member states. In what comes of regulations, first we have the European Strategy on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities 2021-2030, which is a non-binding document, but here the Commission commits to support national, regional, and local authorities in their efforts for the institutionalization and independent living, including through the 2021-2027 shared management funds. These are funds, shared management funds means that the member states are the ones designing and implementing the funds, and the Commission just has a supervisory role or a monitoring role. The Common Provisions Regulation 2021-2027 is the main document that regulates these management funds. And here, implementation of the CRPD is listed as an enabling condition, which would include Article 19. An enabling condition means that if these conditions are not met, the member states would not be able to spend the money. However, nowadays, all countries in the European Union are considered to be fulfilling this condition of implementation of the CRPD. And finally, the regulation of the European Social Fund Plus has as an objective the promotion of the transition from residential or institutional care into family and community-based care. Can you go into the next slide? The one before, sorry. Yeah, there you go. I wanted to mention the new European Commission guidance on independent living, even though I'm sure it'll come up again later. So this is a very recent document, which was part of the strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities as an initiative of the strategy. This guidance provides orientations on using EU funds for independent living, and it was adopted by the European Commission. It describes some actions that can be financed through EU funds. I highlighted here the development of strategic frameworks, therefore institutionalization strategies in member states, then mapping of existing infrastructure, services, and workforce, and third, the investments into community-based services, accessible and non-segregated housing, and personal support. Can you go into the next slide, please? So we see that the Commission agrees we have great potential from these structural funds to support the institutionalization. So as an example, the European Social Fund Plus can support better access to personal assistance. The European Regional Development Fund can support the development of social housing. Technical assistance could support the development of the institutionalization strategies. And even though it's not structural funds, this also could all be achieved through development cooperation. Can you go into the next slide? However, what we find is that funds are still being used to fund segregation. We have reported cases of investments into institutions to the European Commission. Also, not only through structural funds, but also now through the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is the money that was activated after the COVID-19 crisis. However, we found that the response was not appropriate in our opinion. The responses generally refer to this shared management concept, saying that it's not the responsibility of the European Commission to decide where the money is allocated, but it's the responsibility of the member states. However, we also find that there is a belief that segregating people with disabilities is not a form of discrimination according to the European Union and the staff, as this is also a response we've gotten before, that when contacting managing authorities, they found that investments into institutions were part of a strategy to have better community services, which in our opinion does not make much sense. But the special rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities, when he did the previous one, when he did his study visit to the European Union, he agreed with us. And he said that the relevant authorities do not believe that segregating persons with disabilities into institutions amounts to discrimination. We also reported this to the EU Ombudsman, which recommended to provide clear guidance on institutionalization to staff and member states, and to take actions to end investments into institutions. So we hope that this new guidance will take this role and that there will be clear guidance from the Commission to take to end these investments. Can you go into the next slide? I just want to also touch a bit about organizations like ours that do work monitoring EU funds and what kind of obstacles we find. At the national level, we find that disabled people organizations or DPOs do not have enough capacity to be actively engaged in monitoring committees, which are the organs that are responsible for monitoring EU funds at national level. But even when they are present, what we've been told is that they often perceive that they are not being properly consulted, that they are not listened to, but also that they do not have enough vision over the money that is being spent at the national level and of the planning, or at least they do not receive the information in a timely manner. At the European level, what we find is, as I was saying before, that under shared management, the European Commission does not perceive itself as responsible for in the designing and implementation of the funds, because it is the task of member states. However, we do believe that as being in charge of monitoring, there should be more action, but we haven't seen much use of procedures such as the infringement procedure. And that we've also learned that internal legal documents consider that it can be acceptable and even necessary to invest in institutions. And we do hope that with the new guidance, this might change. Can you go into the last slide? So some recommendations. First, for the European Union, we would recommend to really become familiar with the guidelines on institutionalization and apply them, to support the development and implementation of the institutionalization strategies in member states, to avoid using EU funds for transferring people into big institutions into small institutions, to improve data collection. We still don't have a good data collection that is comparable throughout the European Union on institutions, and to ensure the participation of disabled people and of DPOs at all stages of planning, implementation, and monitoring of EU funds. And for other civil society organizations, we would recommend, from our experience, to be proactive and assess national institutionalization strategies and EU intervention, publish these findings. You can send them to us, and we can also relay them to the European Commission, to review and participate in CRPD committee concluding observations on the member states and also on the European Union, which will be next year in March. To work with partners, and not only those in the disability community, but also outside. We are currently carrying out a project at INIL, for example, with organizations working in the Roma communities and in migration for similar concerns on EU funds. And finally, always raise awareness about the UN guidelines on institutionalization and about human rights violations that you might find in EU funds. That's it from my side, and don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions.
Dear Rita, thank you for your presentation, and we will continue straight away with the presentation Freedom of Movement by Kamil Gongor.
Thank you, Florian, and hello, everyone. So my name is Kamil Gongor. I am working as Policy and Movement Support Officer I work on things like membership and youth, among other things, but I also travel a lot, and I am not the only one that travels. A lot of disabled people travel in Europe nowadays, and I mention this because we talk about freedom of movement. So our right to move and to go from one place to another in Europe. We can say, go to the first slide, please. Thank you. So a few words about what is freedom of movement, just to give a definition. It refers to the right of EU residents to move freely from place to place within the territory of a country, or to leave a country and to go to another one and to return to it. It involves quite a few policies and services that should be implemented in order to make sure that this right is protected. And this includes things from very basic stuff like to be able to use public transport, a train or a bus to move from one place to another, and legislation about it, also for planes, to legislations when you arrive to a country to have access to services and to support and health services and stuff like that. So freedom of movement is one of the cornerstones of the European Union, giving EU citizens and their family members the right to travel, to work, to leisure, to live, in any member states they wish. In 2017, more than half of the people asked, Europeans considered that free of movement of goods also, because you also transfer, one country to another country, a lot of goods and stuff, and services within the EU, considered it as most positive achievement of the European Union. This is very important to understand how highly we value, the ability to move from one place to another, or to work in one place, to study in another place, all these things. So for Europeans, this is something very huge, and it should be important, and it should be equal for everyone. So a lot of Europeans, especially, for example, in Brussels, we have our team and many other NGOs. They are not Belgians, they are people from all over Europe that have the possibility to live and, to work in Brussels. The same apply for many other countries. And so many Europeans, millions of people live in different member states and enjoy their rights on equal basis like they would in their own country. For example, students do the same, or even pensioners who, for example, I am living in Greece. A lot of European pensioners decide that Greece is a great place to come and retire, enjoy the sun and the food. And they have the right, thanks to freedom of movement, to do that. But if we go to the next slide, even though it's a fundamental right, and even though it's so important for a lot of people, it seems that it's not so easy to enjoy for everyone, unfortunately. In a way, it doesn't apply to everyone. There are quite a few differences between social security benefits and social assistance in the EU law. It's very unclear to disabled people that want to live in different member states where a specific benefit falls under, and according to which law, because we don't have unified law systems and every country is different. This makes it difficult for citizens in general to access social services in their host country. So imagine in different countries. And of course, this prevents disabled Europeans from fully exercising our rights to freedom of movement. In addition, there is this uncertainty of whether or not there will be support available in another member state at all. It is also very impactful to our decisions and our life. I will explain a bit better some examples. And whether, will it be considered social security or, I don't know, assistance or something else. Prefer a lot of people, disabled people, to move, and they don't even decide to do that because it's very difficult. And, a lot of people face anyway barriers, administrative, when they want to move. And this puts disabled people to even bigger disadvantage because we need even more things to be in place to enjoy our rights. And it's not only about benefits and about services. It's also about the very basic, as I said. If you cannot even take a bus to move from one place to another, then I mean, or to access housing, in many places it's much more difficult. So it becomes automatically much more difficult. We can go to the next slide. So thank you. So because there are quite a few barriers and problems for disabled people, and when it comes to freedom of movement, Emil and other organizations, of course, work on this topic. Here I included 3 pictures. One, it shows a design of the European Disability Card, because this is quite a work we are doing, especially my colleague Florian is doing an excellent job on that, on the European Disability Card and on the European Parking Card. Very often they go together. And these cards are a big success. And it's important to recognize that adoption of the cards after lobbying for, I don't know, 15 or even more years, it's a success for the movement. And a lot of disabled people will benefit, in various areas when you move to one country and to another. But however, there are quite a few hurdles and obstacles. Unfortunately, it was not possible to achieve important objectives when, these cards were brought that would have contributed greatly, in the elimination of the barriers we face when moving from one place to another, and we would be able to move much easier. So both cards, for example, are valid for stays up to 3 months, unless the holder participates in an EU mobility program like Erasmus. So that's why I mentioned also Erasmus things below. I will explain in a minute. Or the host country decides to extend the validity voluntarily. And very importantly, there is no cross-border recognition of entitlements for services and benefits, services like personal assistance, for example. So if you are a disabled person and you have services and benefits in one country and you want to go to another country, even if this country in theory have better services than the country you are living now, it doesn't mean that you go there and automatically take them. You need to reapply and to go through all processes from the very beginning. And this will take very much time in most of cases, which is crucial if you want to go for a job or study. You don't have the time to wait unlimitedly for that. And also it's important to think that non-disabled people have access to a lot of benefits when they move from one country to another, social services and stuff, and they can transfer it from country to country. But when it comes to disabled people, it's much more difficult. So this cross-border recognition would really be helpful and would really be a change for us. So it's a missed opportunity here. And also it's kind of disappointing that the very long implementation period, even for the services you get now, member states will have almost 4 years to do it, basically to print cards. So we lose a lot of time that is important for us. But at least I hope that in the meantime, we take this time to educate disabled people and all the stakeholders involved about the cards, about our rights, and what they can benefit. So when the time finally comes, everyone knows, because one of the other problems of the cards is that it's very unclear where you can use it from and for what. In one country, use it for X, in another country, use it for Y, and it's not super clear. So, European Disability Card has a big potential, and in the future might be even more strong. It is a tool, but it's not fully supporting our freedom of movement at the moment. Another things when it comes to freedom of movement, as we said, you can go for studying, volunteering, working. So there are European initiatives supporting that European people benefit. And some of these are Erasmus. A lot of young people benefit from the cross-border movement, and at the NIL, we also benefit from that. We welcome volunteers in our office every year, disabled volunteers. And there is a picture below with, I think, 12 of them that came to Brussels from different countries and enjoyed the what Erasmus could offer, and also working with us and learning from the independent living movement and Brussels civil society organizations. Some of them continue it afterwards in Brussels or in their countries. So this movement opportunity really helped people, when you get the opportunity and you use it, it can really change your life. And we saw it with some of these people, myself included. And there is also one poster on the right from the Discovery U. And it is a program when youngsters of 18-year-old can take a pass and use trains and travel for a bit, which is a great initiative. And we were involved from the beginning to make sure that this is an inclusive campaign and that disabled people can also access it, and to raise awareness also about the importance of the train stations and everything to be accessible, and that we might need also tickets for assistance. And European Commission worked with us on that. We also, I remember it was my recommendation very strictly from the beginning that please make posters and visuals and videos, or including disabled people, because otherwise we don't identify with the project you have and we don't think it's for us. So they did, and here you see a poster with disabled person, and I think with one non-disabled to promote the topic. So it's important, to when you have campaigns for European campaigns, to also include the disability in the mainstream, campaign. So we know it's for everyone. And then we developed some online tools in the website with them and with other partners. And we can go to my final slide. That's a bit of personal experience, because I know it's very helpful for people to, to learn my stories. And so after the first photo I included here is from my studies. I studied in Athens and finished my university. But then I got accepted to do a master's in Poland in a very prestigious and nice university. However, I never went to do it because I could not get the support I needed to travel abroad, even though I should have the right, like everyone else, to study abroad. And I was accepted very high in the list of the people. I never was able to do it because it's much more difficult for a disabled person to go abroad and live abroad and access the services of a country. So that's an education example when it comes to the barriers of freedom of movement. On the right, you see a photo of me in Brussels in front of the European Commission. So as I said, I work for ENIL, the European Network on Independent Living. It is based in Brussels. However, I am not working in Brussels, even though I would love it, because it's very difficult to go and live in Brussels and to access support and personal assistance if you have 24-hour and high support needs like me. So I'm working remotely, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. But I would love, Belgium and EU to be more inclusive and to give opportunities for people like me to travel and work in any country we wish. In my case, I would like to be now, I don't know, with Antonella, Rita, Florian, and others, in Brussels, and not here in Athens, which is nice because Athens has a good weather, but still, Belgium is my job, and I will be there. And finally, on the bottom is a photo of me doing my volunteering Erasmus almost 10 years ago, which was inclusive, and Erasmus gives you support for personal assistance and accessibility and things like that. So this Erasmus changed my life. I find my job for ENIL, and I go to conferences and things, and with many of you we have collaborated. So I wanted to say with this final picture that when disabled people are, and when you have inclusive programs and you give the opportunity for everyone to enjoy our right to freedom of movement, then we can benefit and really change our life, and make the most out of it. So I think that's it from my side. Thanks a lot for your attention. I am happy to answer questions afterwards.
Thank you, dear Carmel, for your very good presentation. I hand over to Nadia Haddad, the ENIL co-chair, who will talk about global action.
Thank you, Florian. And thank you for the previous speaker for making the audience understanding what it is about independent living. And now that you all know what it is and how you can work on deinstitutionalization and how the freedom of movement is realized, let's go and have a look how the European Union realized at least or not one of these principles of independent living to the global action. You can go to the next slide, please. So the context a little bit. So worldwide, we are more than 1.3 billion persons of disabilities. That means that we represent 60% of the world population, 1 on 6. And 80% of us is living in a low income or middle income country. So it's very important that the European Union, who is, together with the member state, the world's biggest donor on development assistance. So only the European Union is given 79.5 billion euro for the framework of 21-25. And the European Union has 140 delegations worldwide, plus those on the 2 headquarters, Brussels and Strasbourg. So it's spread very well. And it's also defined herself, the European Union, as being among the first global trading partners for foreign investors. And they say that promoting peace, stability, and a rules-based global order is something that ensure that they are realizing the rights of persons with disability elsewhere. So within the Commission itself, they say that prosperity and peace in the European Union's neighborhood and beyond are crucial for the European Union's own stability and security. So they highlight themselves that it's very important to invest in global nation. And so for them, international development and humanitarian action on our side must be inclusive and accessible, aligned with the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disability, and especially on Article 11, 19, and 32, where we will have a focus on, and we see what it's about in the next slide, please. So Article 32, it's really specific on international cooperation and said that it's really important then through international cooperation that the member state will really ensure the promotion and support the national effort for the partner country to realize the proposal of the convention that meets all the articles. All the articles of the convention are supposed to be realized through development cooperation also. And it should also involve regional organizations, civil society, and especially organizations of persons with disabilities. They highlight through this article also different measures that the member states could use to realize that international cooperation is inclusive, like accessibility, guaranteeing accessibility, also capacity building, and exchange of information, trainings, and exchange of best practices, facilitating also cooperation in research and having access to scientific and technical knowledge, also providing technical and economic assistance, including by facilitating access to and sharing of accessible and assistive technologies through transfer of technologies also. And also and they highlight also in the second part of this article that it's not that it only should be realized through international cooperation. Each member state still has the obligation to realize the convention herself by having ratified it. So another article on the next slide is Article 11, and it's about the situation of risk and humanitarian emergency. So also the convention really obliged that under international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law, that all necessary measures must be taken to ensure the protection and the safety of persons with disability in situation of risks, including armed conflicts, humanitarian aid emergency, and occurrences of natural disaster. So it's very large, and it should not exclude any person with disability, regardless the type of support degree he needs, and it should be inclusive also. So what's the link with Article 19? So it should ensure the principle of independent living that I repeat, Antonella went through it, and it means really like in all activities of the global action, we need to ensure that there is self-determination, self-representation of persons with disabilities, that they have choice and control over their daily life through the policies that will be established, and that we really focus also on deinstitutionalization so they do not repeat institutionalization like they have in Europe, where we have more than 1 million persons still locked in institution, and there is still a lot of other things going wrong in Europe, not repeating this through the global action. And it means also that there must be meaningful involvement on all levels, from the beginning until the end. We saw also exchange. It reminds us also about a lot of independent living the pillars that we'll highlight later. So on the next slide, we will go back to the European strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities that will enter now in her second phase. So within that strategy, it was really highlighted that it will ensure the rights of persons with disability, not only in Europe, but also behind Europe, that they are aligned with the CRPD, respected, protected, and fulfilled. So the EU institution and all its members are supposed to take the most relevant actions to generate the most needed changes to have a positive impact on millions of people around the world. However, within the strategy itself, there was one section, 6, on promoting the rights of persons with disabilities globally, but it was incomplete and inconsistent. It fell short of specific action. There was no clear timeline or funding allocated to implement this or to monitoring this. Next slide. Also, there was nothing about accessibility in the European Disability Strategy, about European aid-related information or facilities. There was no consultation on accessibility with the civil societies, and it was, even if we wanted by ourselves as OPD, having access to how that funds were related, it was not accessible. And there were no standard accessibility requirements in the use of EU public procurers rules, or when they were called for tenders, or how to the EU grant aid money to contractors or money or implementing it. So the modalities and the procedures put in place by EU represent many, many obstacles to persons with disabilities, and the funding was excluding them. There was also in humanitarian action, there were some Directive General European Civil Protection and Human Rights Operations published in 2019, but there was no mention on how it will be implemented or monitored, and there was no mention at all on how the European plans to align it with the international standards. So we go to the next slide. And so within the new strategy, had the European political profile as leading disability rights on global action, there was no leadership and no mention on the participation to promote disability rights in key area to global mainstream development and humanitarian action. So there was nothing on how they will implement, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals during the high-level political forum. Even when there was the COP on climate change, for example, we saw still this year, there was not one speaker or one side event that the European Union organized with a specific attention on disability or the effect of the impact of climate change on disability. It was just like we were not existing. And also, when we speak about the regional forum on disaster risk reduction, there is still not really involvement of organizations of persons with disability in this area. The next slide, please. So like I said, also in the climate action, not on the goals, nor on the objectives that they have. There was no adaptation of planning taking persons with disability sufficiently into account. Even in the disability rights strategy, there is a special section 5.6 that recognizes the impact of climate change on persons with disability and the need to ensure that the green transition is also fully explicit. But it's not following up, it's not taking into account also in the section on global action, and there was no reference of participation of persons with disabilities through the representative organization in implementing anything on climate action. The next slide, please. So that was about the European Disability Rights Strategy, but there was something else that they did themselves. So last year, there was a European guidance note on the inclusion of persons with disability in the EU global action that they have realized. So it was really good on some points. It was really that they recognized that there was a need for the staff and the delegation around the world to train them on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. They acknowledge that disability inclusion is essential to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and peace and human rights in the world. It's also an example that the EU is going to increase the efforts to promote disability inclusive development and policies and programs. But it also included 2 technical briefs on disability inclusion, gender equality, and women's empowerment. And there was also 1 technical brief on disability inclusion and climate priorities. A positive thing was also that they will have an UDEC marker, disability marker, that they would also implement. You can go to the next slide, please. But what was missing? It was really that, again, the investment and training of EU staff was not done in any collaboration with any RPDs. So they should strengthen the dialogue to make this guidance note working and a success. We need to be meaningful. We need to have the opportunity to participate meaningfully. We need also a strong monitoring on the use of these guidelines, and it should be updated regularly by what we learned, what is missing, and what is still needed. And it should also have a clear roadmap for all internal and external stakeholders to participate in it. The next slide, please. So again, here I will just remind the pillars of independent living without going through it, and see I will focus today only on the funding, because if we go to the next slide, we can see that within the European Union there are 4 funding instruments. One is the Global Europe on neighborhood development and international cooperation instrument. Another one is the European Fund for Sustainability Development Plus, and it's a tool to promote sustainable investment in European Union's partner countries. Another fund is the budget support that goes directly, it's transferred to the national treasurers and engaging them in sustainable development reforms. And then there is also a trust fund that are set up to pool funding from different sources, and the European Union can set up a multi-donor trust fund for emergency, post-emergency, automatic actions in the field of external action. But I will focus only on this one. Why? Because we see the big amount. It's near about 18 billion of euros that they will spend in those 6 years. They say they will focus this on education and humanitarian development. So from independent living perspective, they should invest only in inclusive education. And when we speak about human development, so it's about our human rights that should be respected. They say they will tackle climate change. So the money should be screened if they really involve organizations of persons with disabilities, taking part in the negotiation tables on every policy on climate change. They will foster digitalization, so you should be ensured that it is accessible, affordable, and adaptable regarding to disabled people's needs. And when they say they will speak about boosting sustainable growth, jobs, and trade, we should definitely avoid that there will be any reproduction of any segregating settings. And then when we speak about jobs and sustainable growth, it should be all inclusive, but later on Florian will go through to highlight what we mean about inclusive employment. And then also they say that one of the focuses will be promoting the rule of law on European values. So if independent living is a value within Europe, it should be elsewhere also. On the next slide, I wanted to highlight some of the several goals that they will take into account, where we could include independent living directly. When they speak about security, peace, and stability, it should be we should be part of it. Same thing with migration and mobility. Same thing with economic growth. Same thing with human development, including gender and disability. It's just that for the newcomers who are working in the parliament or working in any area within the European Commission, these things exist already and are supposed to be realized. So I just wanted to highlight that within every different action and within every different goal, it's still possible to include independent living and the participation of persons with disabilities. On the next slide, you can also see that they have thematic pillars where we could very easily also include the pillars of independent living. When you see that money will go to civil society organization, okay, that's good. But then organizations of persons with disability should be also benefit of at least a part of that 1.36 billion, as well as in Europe as in the partner countries, and to allow them to participate meaningfully in all policies that are linked to their daily life. And the same thing with when they say they will have rapid responsible pillars with a lot of money in it. Yeah, it should also strengthen the engagement of persons with disability and realize independent living for all. We can go then to the next slide. So the European Union now is really saying on her website and in her declaration that they will provide humanitarian and development aid around the world and promoting fundamental rights such as dignity, equality, and solidarity. So and they will have really a lot of funding in all this. But if we speak about dignity, then it's automatically linked to independent living. And so they have a lot of different ways how they do it and with whom they work. But if we screen with who they work, they say they will work with international group, NGOs, and networks that provide international aid. When we screen them very fastly, there is no organization of persons with disability with an independent living perspective. So this is something that the upcoming commissioners and politicians on European level should really take into consideration. We go to the next slide. So what do we want as independent living movement? We want that the next decision makers take into account within their European Global Actions Disability Action Plan. Similar, they have one. There is a European Action Plan on gender equality and women's empowerment and external action. There is one on human rights and democracy action plan and the European Global Action, but there was none on disability action. So we want one to stop these incurrence in policies and programs, and also to eliminate all kind of barriers to independent living and to include persons with disability in the world in the European policies. So this action plan should really respect independent living principles and the independent living pillars. And it should be aligned not only with the convention and Article 19, but it should also mainstream the inclusion of persons with disability in the agenda and in the SDGs. It should be also implemented in the agenda for humanity and the Sendai framework when we speak about disaster risk reduction and the Paris Agreement on climate change. And how? We can go to my last slides. So it should be really based on a human right approach. And so to ensure that there is no discrimination and that meaningful participation for all, even marginalized groups, including women and girls with disabilities, are not left behind. And it should also guarantee that universality and indivisibility and equality and non-discrimination. Another point will be equity and equality, where they guarantee reasonable accommodation, they provide adequate funding and target measures that are in place to ensure that equity in inclusion and equality participation and realization on the rights for all is there, and that there is, including those at risk of intersectional forms of discrimination or those who are disadvantaged due to gender, age, socioeconomic status, or other characteristics. There should also be an empowerment of persons with disability to be part of those action plan and to be involved in global action. And we end with the last slide. So there must also be campaigns about awareness raising, why it's important to include independent living and the rights of persons with disabilities in global action through authorities, civil societies, and other stakeholders. And we need to make them understand the in and outs about disability inclusion, independent living, to end any kind of discrimination and segregation. There should be technical cooperation, and there should also be a coordination between the stakeholders who all work on development cooperation. And I will end up by this. And thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, we are still there, not only today, but also later on, because it may be very much at once. But that's why Enil is highlighting this now, to take it with you and that you can come back and collaborate further on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadja. I can only support this. Enil is always there for you if you need us. Okay, now I continue with my own presentation, which is about employment, European Union policies for the employment of disabled people in particular. So, employment. What does it have to do with independent living? For that, I would like to recall the definition, which is, for example, expressed in the general comment number 5, just to recapitulate the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on the UN, which is the official UN body on this UNCPD, gives out the general comments, and they serve as guidance to interpret the UNCPD. So it says individuals with disabilities are provided with all necessary means to enable them to exercise choice and control over their lives and make all decisions concerning their lives. Personal autonomy and self-determination are fundamental to independent living. Then we have the 12 pillars of independent living, where employment, well, first of all, you have here access to adequate income. So the 12 pillars, these are prerequisites. So disabled people can live independently. We need all these things, which have not be extended we need all these things so disabled people can have that self-determination and full control. And here, employment is relevant 2 times: access to adequate income and equal opportunities for employment. Because the connection is obvious, only if you have sufficient income, we live in a monetary-based society. To be able to access goods and services, you need, well, money, and money, the best way to have access to money is still employment. Then article employment appears. There is an article on employment in the UNCPD. That's Article 27. It states that state parties recognize the right of persons with disabilities to work on an equal basis with others. This includes the right to an opportunity to gain a living by work freely chosen or accepted in a labor market and work environments that is open, inclusive, and accessible to persons with disabilities. It specifies that discrimination is forbidden, that there's a right to favorable conditions of work, labor and trade union rights, access to vocational guidance, career advancement, disabled people have a right to a career, not just work, self-employment, public sector employment, reasonable accommodation, promote work experience in the open labor market, and vocational and professional rehabilitation. Then in the European Union level, since I'm policy coordinator, this is my area, we have already in 2000, there was a directive adopted, which was highly progressive at the time, the Employment Equality Directive, and it established at the EU level a ban of direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, harassment, and instruction to discriminate. Indirect discrimination, that is when there is a appearing neutral rule, which has the effect of creating a disadvantage for disabled people. Also in this directive is a right to reasonable accommodation, actually. This means that you might have a specific requirement in order to be able to work, for example, more flexible working times, or need special equipment, and you have a right to get this. However, what was the effect of this directive? Can we say it was effective? Rather not. So from 2003 to 2010, the employment rates of disabled people, it improved from 42 to 50%. But then between 2010 and 2023, we had a very extremely marginally increase of only 0.8 digit points. In the same time, the employment rate of non-disabled people increased from 67.9 to 75.3%. So it dramatically outpaced the employment rate of disabled people. So we can say that in the European Union, disabled people are really disadvantaged when it comes to exercising their right to work. And the right, which is established in the UNCPD, it is not implemented at all yet. We have not made not any progress for about a decade now. Yeah, and this inaccess has really dramatic consequences. No, before I come to that, I wanted to say this: even when disabled people are in work, there is often in work poverty because they tend to earn less in comparable situations. The wages are lower. Disabled people are not as often promoted as non-disabled people. There are fewer disabled people, far fewer in leading positions, and they are usually about the first to be dismissed when companies encounter difficulties. Consequences are that the rates of poverty among disabled people and homelessness are far higher than for non-disabled people. Actually, many of the homeless people you see are people with psychosocial disabilities. This is really a big part of the homelessness population. It increases the risk of institutionalization. This is feedback which we are actually receiving from disabled people who say, I could I could live on my own, be independent, if I only had a job, which I cannot get. And of course, it has negative effects on other rights. For example, the right to family life, or also inability to access the freedom of movement. Yeah, and that is all quite bad, because also the UNCPD, it is an immediate right, but also it is homework. A compulsory to-do list for state parties to implement. The EU and all member states are state parties, and here we are really not doing our homework. Possible solutions: we are proposing a reform of that Employment Equality Directive. Make it easier, for example, for people who have been discriminated against to have access to justice. Also to have higher fines, because we know even the EU disability strategy says that employers rather pay a fine than to employ a disabled person. So they often lose in court and then just pay the fine and then all is forgiven. That's not okay. And also the right to equal pay for work of equal value and discrimination by association are not yet in the directive. But something I would rather like to talk about here is changing funding. We have now this year started to advocate for a change of legislation on state aid, which I will explain now. First of all, what is state aid? It is regulated, or the competences are granted in Articles 107 and 109 in the EU treaty. It's state aid is a form of financial support granted from state resources to undertakings. It can take the form of grants, loans, or capital injections. And an undertaking is any entity offering goods and services, also entities offering goods and services for disabled people. The European Commission has quite strong enforcement powers here. It can legislate and it can review and decide that a member state has to alter or abolish in financial support. In ongoing research, we have discovered that significant investments not in line with the UNCPD are ongoing. In 11 cases, 534.03 million euros were spent on sheltered employment. We have only found 11 cases so far. However, this is research which will be going on indefinitely now. We will be adding cases to this list whenever they appear. So this has been a lot of money has been going into sheltered employment. Why is this problematic? First, the UNCPD in General Comment number 8 speak about inclusion in the regular labor market, not sheltered employment. And General Comment number 8 confirmed that sheltered employment is a form of discrimination. It is not inclusion in the regular labor market. So it is not in line with the UNCPD. But also, we know actually that also in practice, so the reason for sheltered employment, the raison d'être, how you say it, is that it provides transitions into regular employment, allegedly. But we know from a large empirical study by Dutch researchers that it does not do this. It does not increase the employment rate of disabled men, and it actually reduces the employment rate of disabled women if states use sheltered employment a lot. And we also know from individual accounts of disabled individuals, when they look for work, that authorities, social services will rather pay for sheltered employment than, for example, for other possible instruments like assistance at work. So there is, coming back to state aid, there is a new legislation on state aid, which allows countries to financially support these measures listed here to improve the labor market integration of disabled workers. Almost all of these instruments are very good, very helpful, as we saw, except sheltered employment. What we propose is to have more resources available for all the other the helpful sustainable instruments, just to take sheltered employment out of this list. And here's we have already a concrete amendment which we are proposing. Yes, that's all for my part by now. There's of course further information. You will find a full briefing explaining all of this in detail on our website. And also, if you want just have read this in short, there's an article in the Social Europe Journal. You don't have to hastily write down these links. They will be provided after. There will be a recording online, and we will provide the slides. Okay. Okay. And I fall back into my role as moderator. I thank myself for this presentation, and I hand over to Ines Bulic-Koshokario on access to housing.
Thank you, Florian, and hi, everyone. You will be happy to know that I have the last presentation today. As Antonella said at the beginning, independent living has many different components, and access to housing is one very important component of independent living. So Florian, can you please go on to the next slide? I will start with a little bit of the context. And this is really to reflect on the problems we face at the moment when it comes to access to housing for disabled people. So there are many difficulties. The first one, of course, is that there is not enough accessible housing out there. Talking about old buildings, but also when new buildings are being built, they're often still not accessible. Disabled people face discrimination in renting or buying properties. Among the homeless people, many of them have some disability, are disabled. So many people find themselves without any home at all. Disabled people may face administrative barriers in accessing housing, perhaps because the procedures are not accessible, because of eligibility, and for other reasons. There is a lack of social housing we could say probably in all the countries in Europe. Housing is very expensive, so the cost of living, the rising cost of living has affected people in general, and not just disabled people, but disabled people who are already among the poorest of the poor are impacted disproportionately by that as well. And you know, for all of us who live in Europe, I think everybody can testify to the fact that the prices of rents and properties are going up all the time for various reasons. There are a lack of support services for disabled people to access housing. So we are talking about information services, you know, all sorts of advocacy services, legal support. Not many organizations of disabled people provide this kind of support, and there are not many organizations in general who provide support with access to housing. And finally, a huge issue we face is that we still have at least 1.5 million people who live in segregated housing in institutions. And these people are often considered by government as having a house, as being housed. So they are not even eligible for any kind of mainstream housing in the community. And the last issue I was mentioning is when we are reading about the housing problems in Europe, when we are talking about the importance of housing, disabled people are often invisible in these conversations, as if they don't need housing, as if, you know, they can perpetually live with their families, or as if they belong in institutions. So this is a little bit of the grim context we face. Now I will talk about what should be happening. Next slide, Florian, please. So housing is, of course, a basic human right. Sometimes we talk about the right to have a home, but without sort of a roof over our head, you know, a lot of other things, you know, don't matter. It is very important. And of course, there is a whole body of international law around the right to housing. Perhaps the most significant would be the General Comment 4 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which describes what the right to adequate housing means, because not any housing, of course, is adequate housing. We also have the right to housing in the revised European Social Charter, which allows certain NGOs to file complaints against their governments. And the right to housing is also one of the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, Florian, please. But since today, of course, we talked a lot already about the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and housing has an important place there. Some of the articles which talk about housing are, of course, Article 28 on adequate standard of living and social protection, Article 19 on accessibility, and our main article, Article 19, on the right to independent living. We could mention other articles as well on Article on non-discrimination, but these would be the ones to highlight now. Next slide, please. Now, let me start first with the accessibility before I get to the right to choose where and how to live. Accessibility of the built environment is key, of course, to making sure that that housing is accessible to disabled people. But also, it's not just the housing itself. The areas around the housing have to be accessible too, because there is no point having accessible buildings or houses and disabled people not being able to get around them at all. That would lead to people being imprisoned in their houses. So accessibility in general is very important to the right to housing in particular. And some of the things government should be doing is, of course, eliminating barriers. They should be making sure that the building and urban planning codes are revised and have accessibility requirements. They should include standards of universal design in everything regarding the built environment. And they should establish accessibility standards for housing that are in line with the UN Disability Rights Convention. Next slide, Florian. Now, in the context of independent living, I'm not going to go again through Article 19, but a key component of the right to independent living is that disabled people have the right to choose where and with whom they live. They should not be obliged to live in a particular living arrangement. And the government should be taking steps to prevent segregation or isolation of disabled people from the community. And housing as a mainstream service has to be responsive to the needs of disabled people. So this is what we have in Article 19. Next slide, please, Florian. Now, the General Comment 5, which explains further how Article 19 should be implemented, explains in relation to housing that what this means in terms of what the governments should be doing is that disabled people should have the opportunity to live in the community on an equal basis with others. There has to be sufficient quantity of accessible housing available for disabled people, but also for their families or whomever they want to live with. And this housing has to be available everywhere within all areas of the community. So the disabled people, just like everybody else, can choose to move to a particular town or, countryside. People should not have to choose a specific place to live just because accessible housing is only available in that location. In terms of new housing, this has to be barrier-free. but also existing housing should be renovated to make sure that it becomes accessible. Now, what this means is practice. It could be about installation of ramps or lifts, making sure that apartments are accessible, having accessible bathrooms, kitchens, but also using and subsidizing smart technology, assistive technology, so that the place where a person lives is fully accessible, is fully adapted to their needs. And of course, the housing, this type of housing cannot be so expensive that nobody can afford it. It has to be affordable. It has to be accessible to disabled people. Next slide, please, Florian. Housing, the right to housing also has a special place when we talk about deinstitutionalization, because deinstitutionalization is simply not possible if people don't have a place where they can move to from the institution. So we can have support services, we can have personal assistance and other services, but if there is no place where a person can live, of course, they are then bound to stay in an institutional setting. So in the context of deinstitutionalization, governments have to think how to provide safe, accessible, and affordable housing in the community for people living in institutions. They need to have a plan for that. This can be done through the use of public housing or rental subsidies, supporting people to to enter into rental agreements or even buy properties, and as the basis of that, providing information to people about what different options they have in terms of housing to be able to leave institutions. Some people may have housing of their own, perhaps belonging to them or their family, but some people will need specifically help, for example, with renting housing or accessing social housing, etc. Article 19 also mentions this word residential, which is oftentimes reinterpreted, oftentimes wrongly interpreted in such a way that it means governments should provide residential care. But no, this is explained in the guidelines on deinstitutionalization, among other. Residential support simply means that governments must provide services to disabled people leaving institutions to make sure they're not discriminated and to ensure equality in accessing the right to housing. Different types of housing different types of residential support and housing that are mentioned in the guidelines on deinstitutionalization are social housing, self-managed co-housing, free matching services, but also assistance in challenging housing discrimination. And at the basis of all of this is, coming back to the beginning of the seminar, is self-determination and the right to choice. Now, that's fine, Florian. What should countries not be doing? They should not be building any type of housing in specifically designated areas just for disabled people and arranged in such a way that disabled people have to live in the same building, complex, or neighborhood. And they should not allow third parties, such as, for example, agencies or banks, that provide loans, to impose practical or procedural barriers that deny disabled people the possibility to rent or that put them at a disadvantage in the housing market. And finally, very important, they should not be providing housing that is part of the same package as medical or any other kind of support, so that people, you have housing provided by a certain service provider that offers care, or even, but sometimes it's called personal assistance as part of the same package, where people are then locked in that arrangement and they cannot leave one or another without losing something. So if they don't like the support, they cannot change the support. If they don't like the housing, they cannot change the housing because they would lose the support. Next slide, Florian, please. So this is one example of what the countries should not be doing. This is a picture of a very modern housing complex in the Netherlands, and I found online that it is the largest residential neighborhood for disabled people. And it consists of 110 ground level homes and 84 care apartments just for disabled people. So this is a segregated community for disabled people, which is actually marketed as providing people with the opportunity to live independently. But it is segregation because it is just, we do not build neighborhoods for Black people, or we do not build neighborhoods for, I don't know, people who are of different sexual orientation or something. So we should also not be building neighborhoods for disabled people either. Next slide, Florian, please. So in terms of our recommendations, because housing is a key pillar of independent living, we would like all countries to have comprehensive housing strategies which address the barriers faced by disabled people as part of their right to independent living. We would also like the European Union to have a similar housing strategy. We would like the country should develop a range of housing options, but also have support services ready at the same time. So there's no point having just housing, but people not being able to access, for example, personal assistance. So they should be working on both at the same time. We need more social housing everywhere that complies with accessibility standards, that is accessible to disabled people. We need governments to provide financial support for housing adaptations for people with different kinds of impairments, to provide subsidies for rent, to increase home ownership among disabled people by providing different, again, financial and other types of support services for that. We need to eliminate discrimination between different groups of disabled people. And again, going back to Rita's presentation, so that if you have an intellectual disability, you're equally entitled to housing, just like somebody with another kind of impairment. And we need more programs to help disabled people access support for housing. I mean, how to access different benefit, how to get into social housing. So we need organizations, we need funding for organizations and support services to work on that. And the final slide, yes, the final slide is a little bit looking at the bright side. There are many opportunities at EU level now to focus on housing. As mentioned, we have the new Commission guidance on independent living, which really focuses on how to use EU funds to support housing for disabled people in the community. But also housing in general is a priority for the new European Commission. For the first time ever, we have the European Commissioner with responsibility for housing. We have the European Affordable Housing Plan, an investment platform for affordable and sustainable housing. We will have the revision of state rules. And there are indications that there will be more investment into housing from the new multi-annual financial framework at the EU level. So there are many opportunities, but it is important that disabled people are part of that conversation, that they're considered in these discussions, and that all of this addresses the real problems disabled people face when it comes to housing. I'll stop here. Thank you for your attention. Here is a little bit of further reading. We will share the presentation so you can access the links as well. Yes, thank you. And back to Florian. Florian, you are muted.
Yes, I had to find the unmute button again. I'm sorry. Yes, okay. This was the last presentation. We're at the end of our presentations. I hope you are still awake after all of this. I would now very quickly open the floor to questions or points of discussions you would like to raise. Yes, so you can talk a bit as well. Yeah, if you have a question, would like to take the floor, please raise your hand.
Florian, there is also a question in the chat. Oh, you answered it. Okay, sorry.
Yes,
About the
until,
workability, yeah.
I can just, not everybody has to read the chat until everybody maybe has a little pause to think if you want to ask a question. So the question was whether this assessment of workability based on health conditions is in line with the human rights model. And I then asked, it depends what the conclusion of this is, whether it's about then identifying barriers and needs to overcome them, or to exclude a person. Yeah, that's the question. Yeah, so it's hard to say per se. Nadia?
I will just maybe encourage the audience, and even if you don't have a question, maybe you could help us just think for where is your interest for this webinar. So it would help us to work more and deeper. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, Clara Massey has a question. Please, Clara.
Hello, good afternoon. Yeah, my name is Clara. I represent ESPD, the European Association for Service Provider for People with Disabilities. I don't have a question, but first I just wanted to thank you for this event, who also introduced the guidelines on independent living just developed by the Commission. And I wanted just to share with participants that tomorrow with ESPD with Enil, but also COFACE, Rothschild, EDF, and Inclusion Europe, we'll have actually a presentation of the guideline on independent living that will be held from 2 to 3:30. So this is a joint event, and I will be glad to send to share the link to register and with the agenda to people here if you would like.
Yeah, maybe if you could say, if you want to take the floor, maybe you could say which presentation interested you most.
On my side?
No, not you. I mean, participants in general. Or sorry, did you ask a question I did not pay attention to? Then I'm sorry.
No. I was just saying that we have this event with you, with Enil and other organization. So just wanted to share the news because I think it's the right moment to remind it. That's it.
Oh yeah, that's a very good event. It will take place tomorrow. Yeah. So maybe what we can do, because people are shy to talk, maybe everybody switch their camera off who liked the presentation on deinstitutionalization the most. I know I don't see all speakers, I think. Did somebody switch their camera off? Okay, Clara?
Yes. Sorry, it's me again. No, I just wanted to share that I really appreciate on my side the presentation, which was more about the global action to support independent living, and especially also in a candidate country. I think it's also very interesting because we tend to focus on inside the EU, but it's also very interesting to see which tools can be leveraged for other countries outside the EU to also support DI. So thank you for this presentation.
Thank you, Clara. Cesar, also talk, please, Cesar. You're muted, Cesar. Cesar, you need to unmute yourself. Yes, very good.
Yes, you're still muted.
You can hear me now, right?
Yes.
Okay. What going to ask? Oh yeah. Have you been seeing any improvements or positive developments since the new commission has taken a position, or is it too early to say which way they will go? Thank you. And any one of you, maybe Nadia would like to answer. If the new von der Leyen Commission has taken any action in favor of independent living or not. Or perhaps it is too early to know.
If von der Leyen has taken action on independent living,
If there have been any improvements, yeah.
At least, Cesar, thank you for your question, Cesar. I was waiting for you to come in. The only, yeah, I mean, for me personally, at least the guidelines, okay, they're not binding, they are not obligatory, but at least they state very clear that small group halls are also institutions. So that is one winning battle. It doesn't come from Enil, doesn't come from Cesar, doesn't come from somebody else, despite the fact that was already said and repeated and Article 19 in the general comment in the guidelines. Now European Union, I mean, the European Commission itself say that small group halls are also institutions. So a little step on the definitions is already there, so we can refer to it very easily now. When you are speaking on regional level, you can say it's not organization, but it's the Commission that now take it on. And it's right.
By the way, so,
Yeah.
by the way, I hear from the European Disability Forum that the EU strategy 2130 is not too ambitious. Is that true? Do you think so or not? Or is it just okay and you had to go too much further than that for now?
whether the European Union is not ambitious?
No, I can answer, Florian. It's about the European the thing with the European disability strategy is that so it runs until 2030, but the Commission has only defined, flagship initiatives and specific actions until actually this year, right? So for the next 5 years, there is still nothing concrete concretely defined as to, you know, what kind of projects, you know, documents, guidelines, directives, or whatever the Commission will deliver as part of the strategy.
But that is horrible, isn't it?
Yeah, but they are planning a consultation early next year to, you know, to define these. So we are advocating now, ENIL and other organizations. We are proposing, you know, specific actions that should be a part of the second half of the disability strategy. They're also evaluating progress of the first part, you know, the first 5 years. This they're doing right now, and they will publish some kind of progress report. But basically, it's to do with the change of the Commission. So I guess they wanted to see, you know, what kind of ambition the new European Commission would have. And yeah, we just have to be quite proactive now, especially at the beginning of the next year, to say, you know, to advocate for actions that will improve independent living. But yeah, it's at the moment we still don't know, Cesar, what exactly will happen in the next 5 years.
Thank you.
Okay. And another person has risen the hand, Radoslav Koslov. Please, Radoslav, you have the floor.
Hello to everybody. Thank you for very helpful and valuable webinar. And I have a lot of questions. Right now I am in Egypt, and I would like to develop or awareness, raise awareness about independent living here. And I would like to ask, how could I start? I found some organization. One is Raise Egypt or something like that. And what do you recommend me?
Maybe I can try to start with an answer, and then others can complete. First of all, the human rights reporter on disability is from Egypt herself, the special reporter. So it's and it's indeed so. Egypt ratified the convention herself, but there was civic space narrowing problems within Egypt. So many organizations are financed by the government, so they don't dare to speak about what's going wrong. So I think emancipation and awareness raising is very important. But then from human rights basis, without starting even to involve the local politics or whatever, you know, as a starting point. And people are not aware about their rights. So it's really important to inform them about their rights, about the convention, about what they can do to emancipate and how they can reclaim using the convention, their rights and financing.
Okay, thank you. And another question. Today I finished an online webinar about from Citizens Equality Rights and Value, and they told me that I am not able to founding CIL in Slovakia. Do you have some more information about that?
Florian, would you take this question?
I'm not really an expert on CILs and not on Slovakia, nor much, even less. I'm wondering if we have members in Slovakia we could contact about this.
Okay, and another question, another question to Antonella. Did you receive my email?
Yes, I did. I read about your project. I will reply to you and send some information related to that.
Amazing. And another one question. could I cooperate a little bit more with Enel? Is there some space to create some maybe some job or something like that?
Maybe I can answer that. But
Yeah.
there is of course an opportunity to cooperate, but I mean there is we also get our funding by applying for projects, among others. So for example, we can consider working together on a project application, on a funding application. We don't, but yes, that would be one opportunity. Of course, we have when we have events like this, it's good to get involved. But yeah, in terms of starting new things, we don't have capacity, to just kind of to just start working on something completely new or a specific project unless we are able to get funding for that. But yes, if you have a specific idea or a specific suggestion, we can definitely look into opportunities to apply for something together, perhaps also involving some of our other members.
I
So
sent some idea to Antonella about that.
Yes, yes. So that's good. Yes, I'm sure Antonella will reply. But yeah, we are a small team as well. So thank you for your patience. And I think Nadia maybe wants to add.
Maybe it's the right moment. For the moment, Enel is involving her members and all those who have affinity with independent living to develop her new strategic plan. So you can join any of the regional meetings, or you can just send ideas about how we can maybe look after her funding. For the moment, there are European structural funds that member states could get to realize independently. I need to realize deinstitutionalization, but there is no direct way, for example, to fund organizations of persons with disabilities. That may be something that may win the battle and be included in Enel's new strategy. So don't hesitate. Go to a website and see the consultations when they take place, and put your priorities and things where you want us as European networks to work on. All the things that you're struggling with, that's our job. That's why we exist, to look on European level how we could facilitate things that you could realize on national and regional level.
Yes. Thank you, Nadia. And I also encourage everyone who wants to follow Enel closer to subscribe to our newsletter. It's a very good newsletter idea. So it's really short, not more than 6 or 7 well-written articles, which are also clear. It's quite a helpful newsletter, and there you will find information about current activities. We also publish information about events there, and we also regularly ask members for consultations or for input to various things, to studies or for information, or we also have working groups from time to time. And if you're even more interested, you can apply to become a member, and then you will receive even more information throughout the whole year. Now the time is basically up. Don't want to keep you longer. Is there anybody of my fellow speakers who would like to make a last remark? Otherwise, it's time to go.
Maybe I can just remind quickly that since next year is the review of the European Union, to participate if you have capacity, or if you have, for example, information about EU funds in your country, don't hesitate to send it to us so we can include it. Thanks.
Yes, I propose we maybe create a call for information, which we publish on the website and on social media. We also have great social media presences which are helpful to get information We are for the moment still on X, but we try to switch to a new provider. It's called Blue Sky. It's like Twitter, like X, but without Elon Musk and with much less hatred, therefore. So please support us in this transition. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. Nadia?
Just on my behalf, I just wanted to thank everybody. I think that is one of the last public webinars that Ines is organizing this year. So stay on track, stay true, stay independent living minded for all the celebrations you have, to all your holidays, and wherever you want something, don't hesitate to come back to us. Whatever things, when you have frustration or whatever, peer support is part of our task. So don't hesitate. That's why we are there. Don't be shy. There are no stupid questions or stupid interventions. We are blooming ourselves. We are making ourselves sometimes also in such situations. So thank you very much for being here, for attending there. Also to the team, to the staff who realized this, the huge work that they have done during the whole year. You will see at the activity report next year that it's amazing how much we have done in person and online and through different networks. So thank you to all of yourselves by participating, by creating, by organizing. But it's thanks to this that we could try to make those who are not able to speak. Therefore, it's also very clear that independent living is a basic human right for all of us. So thank you on my behalf and on behalf of Jamie also, I think, on all your commitments, and a big thank to Ines, a big thanks to the whole team. In fact, without any discrimination of anyone, each of us has put a part of the puzzle to realize Ines' work this day today and during all the other activities. So big thank you for all of you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Well,
Nadia,
hereby close
Florian.
the event.
you, everyone. Bye bye.
Everybody have a lovely afternoon, and in case we don't see each other anymore, happy Christmas. Merry Christmas.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.